back to our Future of Work series. Today's session is about the future of leadership, and it's been conducted by Jacob Morgan. Jacob Morgan is the author of 4 best-selling books. He's a TED speaker, and he's also a keynote speaker. He's going to be discussing with us something that's a little bit different to our previous series. We've had a look at organizational insights and information around the future of work. We've had a look at the technology that's required to enable a hybrid work style. But today is actually about you. We're going to be looking at what it is that you need to do to prepare yourself to lead the Future of Work series. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Jacob Morgan.
Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. This is, I think, a very, very crucial topic, perhaps one of the most important topics that we can be addressing and talking about today, and that is leadership and how it's changing. Now, when we talk about leadership, there's this visual that I want you to think of. As we go through this content, you're going to see multiple references to this visual of a lighthouse. And for me, when I think of a leader, I really do think of a lighthouse, because if you think about the purpose of a lighthouse is designed to guide people to their destination, to their homes, but also to make sure they do it in a safe way. And when I think of leadership, I very much think of this concept of a lighthouse, because as a leader, what you need to do is you need to build yourself up to become this lighthouse, but you also need to make sure that you shine your light onto other people, that you shine your light onto the sea of uncertainty that we're all a part of. And as I've said many times, there's no point in being a lighthouse if there are no ships in the water. So I want you to remember that as we go through this content, it's not only important for you to embrace and practice these things, but it's also your responsibility to help make sure that you get those around you to practice and embrace these concepts as well, because that is ultimately a big part of leadership. Now, the big question that I want to encourage all of you to think about is, will the leader of 2030 be that different than the leader of today? This was the big question that I set out to explore. So I speak at a lot of conferences and events, or I should say I used to speak at a lot of conferences and events before this pandemic happened. And as I would give talks on leadership, some of the most common questions that I would get from leaders and from the attendees at these events would be, you know, Jacob, we kind of get what's happening in the world now. We want to get a good sense of where things are going. What is it going to take to be a leader over the next decade and beyond? And I thought about this, and I thought this is a very, very fascinating and interesting question. And I certainly had my ideas around it, but I couldn't really find much research, much data to support this. And so what I did is I went out and I started to collect data and explore this topic. Now, I want you to think about, just in your own mind, you can answer this question, or you can throw it up in the chat if you want. Do you think leadership is really changing? Is it going to be that different to be a leader over the next 10 years? In other words, if I were to take you out of your current environment, put you in a time machine, throw you forward 10 years, do you think that you could practice all the same skills and mindsets and techniques that you're using today in 10 years from now and be just as successful? So that's something that I want you to think about, because this is ultimately the question that I wanted to answer with the content, with the book that I wrote, and with some of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, to give you some context around why this is such a crucial question, I estimate that by 2030, we're going to have anywhere between 88 million and 440 million leaders around the world. These are people who are responsible for the lives of others. Now, if you were to go somewhere in the middle of this, we're looking at around maybe 220, 250 million leaders around the world. Now, leaders are such an important aspect, not just of business, but also of life. We can see what's happening with this current pandemic. We can see what's happening with things like Black Lives Matter, with fights against racism and social injustice. It's a lot of the leaders inside of our organizations who are starting to step up and to make change happen. So the reason why it's so important for us to make sure we have the right leaders in place is because leaders don't just shape our organization, they don't just shape our values at work, they actually shape the world that we're all a part of. They shape culture and values, they shape our belief systems, they create jobs, they contribute to nonprofits, they fight for social causes. So we really need to make sure that we have these right leaders in positions of power to help guide us and lead us through this new world of work that we are all a part of. Now, to figure out what is the leader of the future going to look like? What is leadership going to look like over the next decade and beyond? I embarked on a two-part research project. The first thing that I did is I interviewed over 140 CEOs from organizations around the world. These are CEOs from organizations like MasterCard, Best Buy, Oracle, Unilever, Biocon, which I believe is based in India, and many, many organizations like this. Best Buy, Enel in India, Engie, Koç Holdings in Turkey, Tokyo Main, which is in Japan. So I looked at all these organizations around the world, 140 of the world's top CEOs, and I asked all of these business leaders a series of questions, 12 questions that I posed to all of these CEOs. And then the second aspect of this was I partnered with LinkedIn and we surveyed nearly 14,000 employees around the world. And what this allowed me to do was to compare the insights that I got from these CEOs with the information that I got from employees who actually worked for these CEOs. And the results, I think, were very, very fascinating. Now, interestingly enough, the hardest question for CEOs to answer was this one. What is leadership and who is a leader? Now, for those of you who are in the chat, I want to ask you this question as well. So put your answers into the chat, and I'm going to pick a couple of them, and I want to read them out. I want you to think about how would you define leadership? How do you define being a leader to somebody? Let's say I came from another planet. I have no understanding of these concepts, and you wanted to explain to me what is leadership? What does it mean to be a leader? How would you explain it to me so that I could understand it? So put a couple answers in the chat, and I'm gonna see what you guys come up with. So I see one of them: people follow you, and you follow people. Someone who others will follow. A leader is a person who provides direction. A leader empowers others. Okay, some wonderful responses here. Leadership is influence. Creates another leader. Someone who inspires others. Okay, interesting. Helping others to be their best. A change agent, a guide. I love all of these definitions. A motivator who has vision, mentorship. Okay, I love all of these responses. Notice that nobody in the chat put that a leader is somebody who makes money. A leader is somebody who creates a lot of revenue or profitability for their business. I have yet to see a single response in the chat from almost 1,000 of you who said anything about money or business performance or metrics or anything related to that. All the answers here that you're putting in are about being human, taking care of people, guiding other people, helping other people become more successful, creating a vision. In other words, really thinking about this lighthouse concept, which I think is very, very relevant and important. Now, the reason why I find this fascinating is because a lot of our concepts of leadership have always been built on this idea of a leader as somebody who makes the most money for the organization. They close a lot of deals. They've been at the company for a while, and now they're a leader. And what we're starting to see is that our very definition of leadership is actually starting to change. And the reason why this is such a hard question for CEOs to answer, and leaders in general to answer, is because we generally don't spend enough time thinking about it. It's kind of like trying to explain and define what is water. Everybody knows what water is. When is the last time you had to explain what water is to somebody? And how would you even explain it? What would you say? It's a clear, tasteless liquid? Lots of liquids fall into that category. But the reason why we don't actually have to explain it or define it is because we assume that everybody around us knows what water is. And when it comes to leadership, the same thing is true. We all assume that everybody knows who a good leader is and who a bad leader is. And because we make this assumption, very rarely do we as leaders or as individuals actually take a step back and try to define and explain what this is and what it means. And this, I think, is a very, very important thing for us to try to figure out. And the reason why this is so crucial is because how you define leadership will dictate the types of filters that you have inside of your organization. Now, one of the things that I have always found so fascinating is I would go into a lot of different organizations around the world. And in these same companies, I would find a leader that everybody loves and admires and respects. Everybody wants to be on this leader's team. And in that exact same organization, I would find a leader who everybody hates. Everybody runs from. Everybody is scared of this leader. Nobody wants to be on this leader's team. So how does that make any sense? How can you have one organization where you have leaders who everybody loves, and in that same organization, you have leaders who everybody hates and is scared of. And the reason why this happens is because the way that those people got promoted, the people who promoted them have different definitions of what leadership is. And this is why it's so important for us to take a step back and to understand and define leader and leadership. Because when you do that, it it creates a filter in your company. And whenever somebody gets promoted, whenever you work with other people, you're going to have this constant filter in the back of your mind of, is this person a leader? Can they be a leader inside of this organization? Well, let me go back to my definition of leadership. Do they match up? And it creates this really great filter in your company. When you don't think about this, then you start to find that all sorts of random people get promoted. So define leader and leadership. Now, getting back to the original question, will the leader of 2030 really be that different than the leader of today? According to the 140 CEOs who I interviewed, the general consensus is yes. So why is leadership going to be different? What is causing it to change? Well, look at what's happening in the world, whether you look at globalization, technology and artificial intelligence, purpose and meaning, the changing nature of talent. Look at what's happening in today's world with Black Lives Matter, with the pandemic. I mean, leaders are being thrown into a world where they have never had to deal with these types of things. And so the general consensus is that because our businesses are going to look fundamentally different, because our world is going to look fundamentally different over the next 10 years or so, it stands to reason that we need a new type of leader to guide us through this change. If the business is different, if the world is different, then the leader also needs to be different as well. Now, I want to give you this really great analogy that I think of when I think of leadership. And most leaders, their kind of mentality is, I have seen greener pastures, and I want to take you to those greener pastures. I did it at my previous company. I did it at my previous job. I know what success looks like. Come with me, follow me, and I, as the leader, will take you to this magnificent place because I've seen it and I've done it. That's the traditional mentality of leadership. But what we know in today's world is that that no longer works. So instead, as a leader, you need to shift your thinking away from, let me take you to greener pastures, to, I'm taking you into darkness. I'm taking you into the unknown. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm not exactly sure how we're going to get there. But if you come with me, then together we will figure out the right path. We will mitigate threats. We will identify opportunities, and we will create this better world. We will create this better vision that I have in mind. But it's not about knowing the way. It's about guiding people into this unknown, into this uncertain world that we are now all a part of. And that's a very, very different way to think about leadership. So the general consensus that I got from all of these CEOs who I interviewed is that leadership is going to be different. And it's going to be different based on what you see in front of you. It's something that I call the Notable 9. This is a collection of 4 mindsets and 5 skills that the world's top CEOs identified as being most crucial for leaders. This is the new arsenal of skills and mindsets that leaders need to possess going forward. And what I want to do for the rest of our time together is to go through these. So let's start off with the global citizen. The global citizen, and this is Ilham Kadri. She's the CEO of a company known as Solvay Group. And Ilham told me this wonderful story about how she was able to negotiate a deal, a big project between the United States and the United Arab Emirates. And lots of other leaders tried to negotiate this project. They tried to negotiate this deal, but they weren't able to do it because Saudi Arabia, the United States, different parts of the world, different cultures, different values, different perspectives. But Ilham, as she grew up, she studied in different parts of the world. She lived in different parts of the world. She worked in different parts of the world. So she had this global citizen mindset. And as a result, she was able to negotiate this really big project between the United Arab Emirates and the United States. So having a global citizen mindset, what this means for you as a leader is that you need to be comfortable surrounding yourself by people who are not like you. People who don't speak the same language as you, people who don't look like you, people who don't believe in the same things that you believe. You have to surround yourself with people who are different. And I'm not just talking about like going to new ethnic restaurants on the weekends. I'm genuinely talking about surrounding yourself with people who are not like you. This is a very crucial aspect when we think about leadership and having this global citizen mindset. This also means that as a leader, you need to think a big picture. The analogy that I like to use here is looking at a chessboard. So I play a lot of chess, and sometimes what happens as a novice chess player, people get very focused with looking at one part of the chessboard, where the action is happening. And they forget to look at the whole board as a whole. Having a global citizen mindset means that not only do you surround yourself by people who are not like you, but you have to look at the chessboard as a whole. You have to look at the big picture. And this is a very, very crucial aspect to have. And I'll give you a story of what happens when you don't have this mindset. So Disney, many years ago, they tried to create a theme park in Paris. And they copied everything that they did in the United States. And they thought that they could just copy it and paste it and drop it off into Paris. And they named this new theme park Euro Disney. Now, as we know, the currency in Paris is the euro. So they literally named this theme park Dollar Disney. And they didn't take into account any of the cultural differences or the aspects of the Parisians. For example, in Paris, it's very customary to have a little bit of wine with your lunch. Parisians are very proud of their culinary prowess. So you can imagine how shocked they were when during lunch they would have to eat with paper plates and plastic cutlery. They were shocked. And so this is a very classic example of how an organization like Disney thought that they could take what worked in one part of the world and just copy and paste it into the other. Now, this, of course, was several years ago, and they had a lot of other problems with team dynamics. A lot of employees ended up striking and boycotting the company. The whole operation in Paris almost went bankrupt because Disney did not have this global citizen mindset. But thankfully, they figured out their mistake, and now the theme park, from what I understand, is actually doing quite well. So you need to have the global citizen mindset as a leader. And I want to give you this great quote that I got from Glenn Fogel. You can't be a leader of a world-sized organization unless you have a world-sized mindset. Okay, so this is the first mindset that you as a leader need to have, global citizen. And by the way, mindsets are different from skills because mindsets are how you as a leader need to think, and skills, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, are things that you as a leader actually need to know how to do. So the next skill that we're going to talk about is the servant. We always hear about servant leadership, and servant leadership is a part of the mindset of the servant, but it's not the whole picture. The servant mindset means that not only do you serve your team, you also serve your leaders. You serve your customers. But one thing that we always forget as leaders is you have to serve yourself. What do I mean when I say serve yourself? If you've ever been on a plane, you'll know that the first thing that the flight attendants do during the safety briefing is they always say, put your own oxygen mask on first before you try to help others. And that's because if you're incapacitated, you can't help others. So you need to help yourself before you help others. And as a leader, what this means is that if you're showing up to work every day and you're exhausted, you're frustrated, you're burned out, you're stressed out, you're overworked, you can't possibly be in a position to lead others unless you can first take care of yourself. You need to make sure that spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, you have to be taking care of yourself. Whether that's eating healthy, whether that's meditating, whether that's exercising, it doesn't matter. But you owe it to your team as a leader to take care of yourself. Otherwise, you cannot take care of others. So the servant mindset means that you serve your customers. It means that you serve your team. It means that you serve your leaders if you have them. And it also means that you serve yourself. It also means that you have to have a little bit of humility and vulnerability to have the servant mindset. Now, perhaps my favorite story from this is about David Novak. And David Novak used to be the former CEO of Yum Brands. And he gave me this really great story about serving your team, which I think is probably, for those of you who are watching, this is probably the most relevant example for you. Serving your team. This is one of the most crucial aspects, and I also think it's one of the easiest things that you as a leader can do. So David shared this story with me of when he used to work at PepsiCo. Many years ago, he was relatively new and inexperienced in his role in operations, and he decided to get together a team of 12 merchandisers in St. Louis, and he brought them into a conference room. He sat them all around the table, and he said, who's the best merchandiser in this room? Who's the one that I should learn from? Who's the one who customers love? Who's the one that everybody looks up to and wants to emulate? And one by one, all these merchandisers in the room said, oh my God, you have to talk to Bob. Bob is amazing. I've learned more from Bob in 3 days than I have in 3 years being at this company. You should see how Bob handles customers. Bob is fantastic. And so everybody keeps saying all these amazing things about Bob. And David looks down the table and he sees Bob, and Bob is weeping. Bob is crying. And David's very confused. He goes over to Bob and he says, Bob, what's going on? All these people are saying these wonderful things about you. And Bob says, I have been at this company for 47 years. I'm retiring in 2 weeks, and I never knew that anybody at this company felt this way about me. You probably can't see, I still get goosebumps when I share this story. This is one of my favorite stories from the book. And when David heard that, it felt like a ton of bricks just smacking him in the stomach, because he was shocked. How could somebody be at this company for so long and never get recognized? And so ever since then, he went on what he calls a recognition crusade. And he made sure that from then on, any employee who worked for him would get recognized. He created fun rewards. He would take pictures with employees, and you can see in the slide here, you can see pictures in his office with his employees. He created these wonderful recognition awards for his people. So I want you to ask yourself, how many Bobs do you have working inside of your organization right now? And how easy would it be for you to go up to one of those Bobs and say, you know what? I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate you. Okay, so this is the servant mindset, is serving yourself, your customers, your team, and your leaders if you have them, and practicing a little bit of humility and vulnerability. Here's a great quote from Carrie Burkhoff. She's the CEO of the Bay Area Federal Credit Union, and she's a good reminder that serving your employees doesn't happen from week one or from month one. It happens from hour one. And Carrie makes sure that the second employees show up to work, she's there greeting them, letting them know that she is there to serve them. Next, we have the mindset of the chef. And of course, a lot of you recognize Julia Child. She is responsible for bringing French cooking and cuisine to the United States. And one of the things that I love about Julia Child is she constantly had to balance cooking healthy food with cooking tasty food. If you've ever tried cooking, you'll know that it's very difficult to balance a lot of ingredients that go into a dish. You put too much of one ingredient, it's too spicy. You put too much of another ingredient, it all of a sudden becomes unhealthy. So chefs are constantly balancing all these different ingredients to make the dish taste and look good. As a leader, there are only two ingredients that you need to balance: technology and humanity. Technology and humanity. Meaning that you need both of these things. Technology allows for speed, productivity, efficiency, but the humanity aspect is what allows you to attract and retain the top talent. It allows you to come up with these ideas, to create new products and services. And if you have too much of one ingredient, things get out of balance. Too much technology, and you lose the ability to attract and retain top talent. You won't have innovation. You won't have those great ideas. Too much focus on only people, you'll get great ideas and wonderful products and services, but you'll be slow to implement. You won't be efficient. You won't be as productive. You won't be able to analyze and look at large amounts of data to help you make decisions. So as a leader, you need to balance these two things, technology and humanity. And a simple rule of thumb that I always like to use is, by all means, use as much technology as you can inside of your organization, but do it in a way that helps your people. It augments them, it doesn't replace them. If you find that technology is putting an extra layer between you and your customers, it's putting an extra layer between you and your people that does not need to be there, then you are putting too much of the technology ingredient into your dish. So you need to constantly be aware and make sure that you have that delicate balance of the two. And I love this quote from Nancy Brown. She's the CEO of the American Heart Association. And she provided me with this wonderful quote. It's a great reminder that there's a lot of emphasis on technology and how it's going to change the world and workflow and business and processes. But we need to all remember that business is still fundamentally based on relationships. You're going to need to focus on this balance of collaboration between people and technology. So that's the mindset of the chef, having these two ingredients in the back of your mind at all times and making sure that you are balancing them in a way where you're not skewing towards one direction or to the other. The next mindset is the mindset of the explorer. And some of you might recognize who this person is. This is Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton. And he is perhaps one of the greatest explorers, one of the greatest leaders who most people don't know about. And the story goes that Shackleton came from a poor family. He didn't have a lot of money. He didn't have a lot of opportunities, but he was a voracious reader. And what he did to learn and to explore is he apprenticed on several different ships until he was able to gain enough experience and authority to captain his own ship, which he did, and he wanted to explore the Antarctic. And so he put together a crew of 12 people. And he took out an ad in a newspaper, and this is what the ad in the newspaper read. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. And this reminds me a lot of a modern day job description, except in a modern day job description, a lot of people don't even get the honor and recognition in case of success. But sure enough, 12 people applied for this job and their journey began. And it didn't take long for disaster to strike because as they were exploring the Weddell Sea, their ship, the Endurance, became entombed in ice. And this is an actual picture of the ship. And you can see that ice is all around the ship, and it was slowly creaking in and cracking and destroying the vessel that they were all on. And they were on this vessel, I believe, for 6 months before it finally got crushed. But not before. They were able to take their lifeboats and all of their supplies, and they made an ice floe their home for the next few months. And an ice floe is basically a large floating piece of ice. And they stayed on that large piece of ice for several months until it started to crack and melt. And then after that, they decided to get into their lifeboats, and they went to Elephant Island. And unfortunately, when they got to Elephant Island, they noticed that the island was uninhabited and also uninhabitable. So again, everybody turns to Shackleton and they say, what do? We're all going to die. He takes a smaller version of his crew and they set sail to South Georgia Island, battling high winds and high seas. It was freezing. They were hungry until finally a couple of them made it to South Georgia Island. And then they had to find the whaling station. They had to hike for 2 days through snow, through ice, through sleet, battling frostbite and starvation until finally they made it to the whaling station. It took another 3 months and 3 attempts to be able to rescue everybody else. Now, my favorite part of the story is that every member of this crew survived. But it's how they survived. Shackleton was constantly optimistic. He focused on being positive. He was described as the type of person who would literally give the shirt off of his back so that somebody else could stay warm. He was an explorer. He surrounded himself with people who were not like him. He had geographers, he had photographers, he had geologists, people who had different skills and mindsets that were different than his own. He spent a lot of time studying different cultures and parts of the world so that he would know how to travel in these different parts of the world. He had a growth mindset, meaning that when these obstacles, when these challenges were presented in front of him, he didn't just assume that they were doomed, that they were all going to die. He had to constantly think of new ideas, new solutions. He had a fantastic ability to possess this growth mindset. He was agile and nimble in his thinking. So when we think of the mindset of the explorer, this is ultimately what I think of. The Shackleton, right? The explorer, the agile, the nimble leader, the leader who has a growth mindset. I think this is such an important aspect for leaders to embrace and to master. Here's a quote that I got from the CEO of SOS International, and he's probably the CEO who I interviewed who was CEO the longest. And he said, because of the fact that I've been in leadership for so long, it's very tempting for me to be very blasé and to assume that I've seen it all, that I know it all, that I've done it all. And as he says, quite frankly, with the changes going on in the world of work, nobody has seen it all. These are the 4 mindsets. Okay, these are the 4 ways that you as a leader need to think. Global citizen mindset, servant mindset, the chef, and the explorer. Okay, this is how you need to think. Next, I want to talk about some of the skills that you as a leader need to embrace. Skills, these are things that you as a leader actually need to know how to do. So these are the 5 skills we're going to talk about next. The coach, the futurist, the technology teenager, the translator, and Yoda. Let's start off with the coach. There's one person who most people say is arguably the greatest coach who ever lived, and that's John Wooden. He was the coach of UCLA men's basketball team in the 1950s, and he led them to an unheard of 11 championships and 7 in a row. And there were a couple of things that made John so unique. The first thing that made John unique is he believed that in order to be a great ball player, you have to be a great human being. And so he knew all of his players as individuals. He coached them, he mentored them, not just on the court, but outside of the court as well. The second thing that John did, which was fascinating, is he focused on the strengths of his people. He knew that you can't have a team where everybody is an all-star. You might have a team where one player is only great at making a basket from one part of the court. And so what he would do is he would design plays so that that player would get that ball in that one part of the court so that they could make the basket. He would have everybody else revolve around that person's strengths. So these are crucial things to remember. And I love that John did this, and it's what led him to such great success. Now, the really important thing here, a lot of people always ask, what's going to be the impact of technology when we think of leadership? Well, I think we can bucket leadership into two general categories. A leader typically does two things. They make decisions and they tell other people what to do, or I should say they make decisions because they have more access to information, they have more influence. And the second thing that a leader does is they try to get people to move in the direction of that decision. Okay, those are the two kind of buckets of leadership. Now, what we're starting to see is that a lot of technology is augmenting the decision aspect of leadership. Technology is going to help leaders make better, more accurate, more informed decisions. So if as a leader, all you do is tell other people what to do, you just practice the command and control mentality, and if technology is going to do that better than you, then what good are you as a leader? What value do you have as a leader? None. But if you're a great leader and you also focus on the human aspect of leadership, getting people to want to move in the direction of that decision, focusing on the human aspect, the coaching, the motivating, inspiring, a lot of the definitions that you threw into the chat earlier when I asked you to define leadership, if you focus on those things, now all of a sudden your value becomes tenfold. Your value increases by tenfold. So this is a very, very important thing to remember. You have to be the coach. Your job as a leader is to help make other people more successful than you. Here's a great quote from the CEO of Sprint, Michel Combs. He says, "I see my role as a coach. On the one hand, I need to produce a vision. On the other hand, I need to enable people to deliver this vision, push them to their maximum, unlock their potential." That's really what being a great coach is all about. The next skill is the skill of the futurist. Now, some of you might be familiar with Isaac Asimov, with Harry Seldon. I'm actually especially excited because I just found out that Apple is making a TV show based on his books, which I'm extremely thrilled to finally see happen. And if you haven't read his series of books yet, it's called the Foundation series. It's a completely fascinating science fiction series. Now, interestingly enough, this is the skill that CEOs identified as being the number one skill for leaders to master. The number one skill for leaders to master is the skill of the futurist. What does that actually mean? A lot of people think that futurists predict the future, but that's not true. Instead, what a futurist does is to help make sure that you're not surprised by what the future might bring. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're not surprised by what the future brings? It turns out that there is a framework that futurists use. It's called the cone of possibilities. And it's something that anybody can Google. If you Google cone of possibilities Jacob Morgan, you'll find an image that I created, which you can use, which explains this in more detail. But basically, the skill of the futurist means that on a regular basis, you ask yourself a series of 4 questions. And the 4 questions that I want to encourage you to ask yourself are, actually, let me give you the visual of the cone first. So imagine for a minute that you're peering through the narrow end of a cone. Okay, so this is the cone, and you're on this side of the cone. And as you look farther out into the cone, the time horizon increases. Now, as you look through this cone, chances are you can predict what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, maybe by the end of the year, you kind of have a good sense of what's going to happen. But as you look farther and farther out into the cone, the possibilities start to expand and the time horizon gets longer. And now it becomes very hard for you to try to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. So you need to ask yourself a series of questions, such as, why might something happen? You know, what are some of the trends that might cause something to happen? What else might happen besides that one thing? What do you want to happen? So you start to ask yourself a series of questions so that you can start to think more broadly about the future. Now, I'll give you an example. We tend to do something like this in our personal lives all the time. Think about it. When you go on a date with somebody for the first time, chances are you run these thoughts through your head of, is this somebody that I can spend the rest of my life with? Is this somebody that my parents would approve of? Is this somebody that would, handle tough choices or difficult decisions? If you buy a house in a new neighborhood, you always think of, what are the schools like in this neighborhood? Does this neighborhood have a lot of potential or promise? Will my home value go up? You think about all these different scenarios and possibilities. But for some reason, when we show up to work, we stop thinking like this because we're focused on the task, we're focused on the project, we're focused on just what's in front of us. So I want to encourage you to think a little bit broader. Start to think in terms of scenarios and possibilities. Looking at another chess analogy, it's not just looking at the one move that you and your opponent might make, it's looking at the multiple moves that your opponent might make. So if you move your knight, how might your opponent respond? How could you respond to your opponent? So think in terms of these scenarios and possibilities. This is a very, very useful and crucial skill. And I know a couple of people we have from India who are watching, right? I mean, one of the greatest chess players, Vishwanathan Anand from India. I'm sure many of you know who he is. From Egypt, there's some great players as well. In New York, great chess club. So depending on where you are in the world, chances are I know a great chess player who is in that part of the world as well. So think like a futurist. Think kind of like this chess player. Scenarios, possibilities. This is very, very important. And I want to leave you with this quote. Leadership is about shaping the future and not just about reacting to trends. Anybody can react to trends, but it's shaping the future which is most crucial. So these are the 4 questions that I want to encourage you to think about, because some people are asking in the chat, why might something happen? What else might happen? What do you want to happen? And what might impact why or why not something would happen? Okay, so you can apply this to anything, whether you look at AI and technology and replacing jobs. Why might that happen? What else might happen besides that? What do you want to see happen? And what are the factors that might impact why technology would replace jobs or wouldn't replace jobs? So think about those types of questions in the back of your mind when you're making strategic decisions, when you're trying to decide on a direction to go down. Next is the skill of Yoda. This is usually everybody's favorite skill. I wonder why. And Yoda is really all about emotional intelligence, specifically empathy and self-awareness. Empathy and self-awareness. And empathy is about putting yourself into somebody else's shoes, understanding their perspective, where they're coming from. Really, again, putting yourself into their shoes, not just saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, but genuinely trying to put yourself into their shoes, their perspective. The second aspect of this is self-awareness, which is understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, what motivates you, what zaps your energy, what excites you. But also, do those around you know these things about you as well? So there's the internal and the external aspect of self-awareness. So this is the skill of Yoda, which is crucial. So again, I want you to think about, are you practicing empathy? Are you really understanding where other people are coming from, where their perspectives are coming from? And do you have this level of self-awareness where you understand these things about yourself, and do other people understand these things about you as well? Here's a great quote. David Meek, he's the former CEO of Wissen, and he gave me this wonderful quote. People keep saying technology, technology, but I've never had lunch with technology. Have you? And he says, I'll take an emotionally intelligent person over a piece of software anytime. And I think that very much sums up what this concept of Yoda is all about. The next skill that I want to look at is the technology teenager. And I've always found it fascinating that when we have problems with technology, we always turn to the kids. We always turn to the teenagers. Somehow they know and they can figure out all these different technologies. Yet, many of them are not technology coders. They're not developers. They can't build these technologies from scratch, yet they are tech savvy and digitally fluent, and that is the exact skill that you as a leader need to have. Today, every company is a technology company. Technology is not just an IT issue. This is also a leadership issue. So again, you don't need to be a technology expert or a coder or a developer, but you need to understand what are the technologies out there that might impact your business, how might they impact your business, where are the opportunities for these different technologies so that you can use them. That is the skill of the technology teenager. And here's a great quote Michael Tipsord, he's the CEO of State Farm, and he says tomorrow's leaders are going to be able to separate hype from what's credible. You need to have a certain level of technology fluency, and not just to kind of pass this off to IT or pass this off to other people. You as a leader got to get in there a little bit too. Again, you don't need to be a tech expert, but you need to have this level of tech savviness and digital fluency. The last skill that we're going to look at is the skill of the translator. The translator is about listening and communication, things that have been timeless in the world of leadership, but also things that are changing dramatically in the world of leadership. Think about all the different ways that we're communicating and listening with each other. I mean, I see grown men now at conferences taking selfies with each other and using emojis. We have video conferencing solutions. We have email. We have phone. We have in-person. And we're talking about augmented and virtual reality. We have so many different ways that we can communicate and collaborate with each other. What this means that you as a leader, you need to make sure that your message gets across regardless of the channel or the platform you are using, whether it's in person or whether it is via text or whether it's something like WebEx where we're doing a video conferencing session. You need to understand how do you get your message and your point across regardless of the channel that you're using and which channel you should be using to get your point across. And this also is for listening. We're constantly distracted with technology. As a leader, you need to really focus on listening, which is not the same thing as hearing. Hearing is the unconscious act of letting sound enter your ear. Listening is about being purpose-driven. It's about giving somebody your time and attention, consciously paying attention to what somebody's saying, putting away distractions like your phone, not having these in front of you, looking at your body language, making eye contact, letting somebody know that you are genuinely listening to them. It's no wonder they say that the greatest form of love and respect that you can show somebody is by listening to them. And here's a great quote from Arnold Donald, the CEO of Carnival Cruises. He says, if you want to be an effective leader, you have to understand the motivations of those around you, and that ultimately starts from listening. Now, these are the notable 9, the skills and mindsets that 140 of the world's top CEOs say are most essential for leaders going forward. Now, if you want, I'm going to put a link in the chat. So if anybody is interested, I'm going to give you a couple of resources. One I'll give you a little bit later, but I'll put one in the chat now. It's called the Leadership Digest. If you want to get a more detailed description of what these things are and you want to get quotes from the CEOs, and I think I even included this graphic in there, you can go to that URL in the chat and it'll give you a nice PDF that you can have as a reference for what these 9 skills and mindsets are. So the next thing that I want to look at is how well are we practicing these things today? So quickly, just to look at this, I asked these 14,000 employees who I surveyed around the world with LinkedIn, and we asked them, how well are your mid and senior level leaders practicing these skills and mindsets today? How well are your mid and senior level leaders practicing these skills and mindsets? Now, if you look at the very well category, you'll see that the number of leaders who scored in the very well category for practicing these skills and mindsets is in the single digits. So you look at the first column. How well are your managers practicing these mindsets? Only 8% said very well. You look at the first yellow category, or I'm sorry, you look at the first blue category. How well are your senior executives practicing these mindsets? 9% of individual contributors said very well. And you can see that all of these things, there's tremendous opportunity here because we're not doing a good job of practicing these mindsets today. The same thing is true for skills. Whether you look at mindset or skills, we're not doing a good job of practicing these mindsets and skills today. We're still in the single digits for leaders. So I want to wrap up by giving you a couple things that you can start doing to become a better leader. First is I want you to define leader and leadership. We talked about this at the very beginning of the session. The second, I want you to take a look at yourself today. Look at how well you're practicing these skills and mindsets, and I'll give you a link in just a minute where you can take an assessment to see how well you're practicing these skills and mindsets. When I give you this link to the assessment, I not only want you to take it, I want those around you, send it to somebody else to take this assessment on your behalf and see if your perception of yourself matches with how other people perceive you. Next is I want you to practice these skills and mindsets. And when I say practice, I mean 1% a day. Can you improve by 1% a day? I think we can all agree that this is something all of us can do. ask yourself, what small improvement can you make every day? And if you can improve by 1% a day, by the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better. By the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better if you can improve by 1% a day. So that's my challenge to you. Last two things, avoid having a typical day. If you find that every day looks the same, behaves the same, you're doing the same thing, you're meeting with the same people, try to mix it up. This will keep you more engaged. This will keep you on your toes. It will give you access to different aspects of the business. This will teach you more things, and you will learn and grow. And the last thing that I want you to remember is you have to guide others. You have to think of this visual of the lighthouse. Okay, your job, your responsibility is not only to guide others, or not only to build yourself up to become that lighthouse, but to guide others as well. So I mentioned a link. Here is the link to the assessment if you want to take it, futureleadersurvey.com. It'll ask you a series of questions that will evaluate you on how well you're practicing these skills and mindsets. Be honest. I'm not going to be looking, I'm not going to be judging you. Nobody else is going to see your responses and they're going to be judging you. Be honest with yourself when you take this assessment, and then send it to somebody else to take it on behalf of you. See if there's a match. So again, last parting words for all of you. I want to encourage you to think about being the lighthouse inside of your organization, inside of your life. As you go through these different skills and mindsets and build yourself up, remember to shine your light onto the sea of uncertainty that we're all a part of and onto others. Because there's no point in being a lighthouse if there are no ships in the water. So that's all for me. Those of you who are interested in more, here's a link to my book. You can also see my email there at the bottom right. If anybody wants to reach out, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'll turn it back over to you guys.
We hope that you've enjoyed the Future of Work series. That was our 6th session. If there's anything that you've missed, if there's anything that you would like to see again, if there's anything from the series that you would like to share with colleagues and friends, then just please do visit us at the Cisco Future of Work series website, and you'll find all of these sessions recorded and on demand, as well as a lot of additional information, more articles, more expert commentary, more things for you to have a look at as you start to think about, plan for, and strategize for your own future of work. That information will be updated regularly, and of course, we also have social channels on Twitter, etc. So do make sure you join us at the Future of Work series website as well. For now, let me thank you for the past 3 weeks, your attention, and let me look forward to having you join us again the next time we put forward a Future of Work series. Thanks so much.